Okay, so I just realized that I lost my ticket from this movie, and now I'm really sad. Hello everyone, my name is Rachel and I review everything. I am so incredibly excited because today we are finally talking about Spider-Man Far From Home. I just uploaded my review of Spider-Man Homecoming a few days ago, so if you would like to go check that one out first, you can totally do so. I'll put a link in one of these corners. I never know which one it actually is. But as per usual, this review will be completely spoiler-free. However, if you haven't seen Avengers Endgame yet, there will be spoilers for that movie. Far From Home takes place shortly after and talks pretty heavily about the events that occurred throughout, so just a bit of a warning there. And real quick before we get started, if you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications. That way you'll never have to miss another upload of mine. Now with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into it. So Spider-Man Far From Home was directed by Jon Watts and stars Tom Holland, Samuel L. Jackson, and introduces Jake Gyllenhaal as one of my all-time favorite comic book characters, Mysterio. Following the events of Avengers Endgame, Peter Parker is forced to step up on his own as Spider-Man and take on new threats in a world that has changed forever. This movie focuses on life after the blip, as they're calling it in the MCU, and the loss of Tony Stark has pretty much everyone asking who will be the next Iron Man, which of course people are starting to look towards Spider-Man to fill that void. But unlike the majority of the first movie, Peter is quite overwhelmed by the idea of no longer being the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. With everything that he's been through in recent time, he has some doubts. He doesn't know that he's ready to step up and become a big-time superhero just yet, especially now that he's without the guidance of his mentor. So the fun thing about this movie is that this is actually the first time we get to see Spider-Man outside of New York on the big screen. Peter ends up traveling abroad over the summer with his classmates on a school trip, and he's just hoping that he'll have some time away from the constant pressure that he's been dealing with, and that he'll have the opportunity to be a normal kid, even if it's just for a little while. Seeing Spider-Man outside of New York like this was very entertaining for me. It's not something that I would like to see all of the time, but for one movie, I found it to be a pretty refreshing direction, especially because it showcases the fact that no matter where you go, there's really no way to escape being a superhero. Trouble is always going to find you. And we witness that harsh reality start to set in with Peter as he really struggles to escape his responsibilities. Tom Holland continues to impress me more and more in this role as Spider-Man. He does such a great job of playing the high school kid that's still learning and figuring his life out while having superpowers at the same time, as if being a teenager wasn't complicated enough already. I also really enjoyed the fact that we got to see some moments with Tom Holland doing Spider-Man things without the Spider-Man suit. It's definitely a little harder to make an actor look like he's using superpowers when he's not covered up in a suit. The use of special effects can be a bit more obvious that way. But between Tom Holland's work as an actor, the way the movie was shot, and touched up, those moments ended up looking pretty believable and made for some really fun scenes. But speaking of suits, you may have noticed that Peter wears quite a few different ones throughout this movie. If I counted correctly, I believe there were about 4 or 5 that we see him in. When I first saw the trailers, that was something that had me a bit worried. I just wasn't quite sure how they were going to introduce each one and how they were going to explain what all those changes were for, but I'd say that it all worked out well, and each suit fit pretty seamlessly into the part of the movie they were introduced in. Now I've saved the best for last because we just have to talk about Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio. It's times like this where I wish I did spoiler reviews. As I mentioned earlier, Mysterio is one of my favorite comic book characters ever, and I'm also a huge fan of Jake Gyllenhaal. So you put Jake Gyllenhaal's head in a fishbowl and it's like a match made in heaven for me. Now I won't go patting myself on the back too much here because anybody that knows this character could probably figure it out, but I totally called what was happening with his story from the very beginning. That being said, it was still really flippin' cool. Jake Gyllenhaal's performance was absolutely fantastic. He looked great, and I'm really just so thankful that they went with the fishbowl, as everyone calls it. That's such an iconic part of the character, and they really couldn't have done a better job with it. You could tell they tried really hard to bring this character to life, and the design of the costume combined with Jake Gyllenhaal's performance, yeah, they just couldn't have done a better job in my opinion. Not to mention the fact that Mysterio has some of the best scenes that I've ever seen in a superhero movie. The visual effects were just so on point. Almost every scene that involved Mysterio was just Almost every scene that involved Mysterio was just so incredible VFX-wise. So huge props to the team that made those happen. In many ways, Far From Home is the exact opposite of Homecoming. I definitely enjoyed both, and I don't even think I'd be able to tell you which one I liked more, but it was nice to see something so different from the first movie that still kept that same overall feel and charm. I'll be giving Spider-Man Far From Home the same rating that I gave Homecoming, 5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was fantastic, I loved every moment of it, and I don't really have a single complaint. Well, aside from the fact that I had to watch watched Tom Holland kiss Zendaya, but that doesn't count as part of the review. So have any of you seen Far From Home yet? If so, what were your thoughts on it? I would love to hear all about them in the comments down below. And just a reminder that you can follow me over on Twitter at rr_everything, where I talk about all kinds of shows and movies and also post updates on future videos. But until then, I'm Rachel, and that was my review of Spider-Man Far From Home.